I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. We're continuing our exploration of this gradual path, the Theravada path of the elders that the Shramana Phala Sutra, the fruit of the path of practice, lays out as Shakyamuni Buddha explained it to King Ajatasattu. And frankly, it's beautiful. Sometimes called the elephant path. There's you may probably seen this. Sometimes a tanka or painting of what's called the elephant path of samadhi, where it's this winding road that goes back and forth like this up until the top of the painting. And at the beginning of the path, there's an elephant that's usually depicted as it's like a pretty wild-looking elephant. It's usually painted black, and there's a monk chasing it. And the monk has two objects in his hand. One is a lasso, a piece of rope, and the other is a goad, which are, at least as my travels in India, is usually what you see an elephant walla is, what he's using to control the elephant. And then there's this maniacal monkey running on ahead. And then all around there's these flames coming up and all of this distraction. And then as we go up this curving path, eventually the elephant becomes whiter. Sometimes it becomes whiter in the front and still darker in the back, but even it's lighter and lighter. And the monkey starts to settle down, and the flames are reduced, and the monkey's catching up to, he's not kind of panting and puffing as he's running along, and eventually he gets a rope on this elephant. And he finally, then the monkey's leading the elephant, and finally the monkey's riding the elephant. And then he's just sitting up there, just completely at peace as this elephant's going along, the flames going on, everything's completely calm. And he gets up to the top of the path, and then he turns around, he comes back down. So that's what kind of a lovely visual metaphor of what I've been kind of nattering on about for the last week. So these tools of the monk, the rope and the goad, are the tools of the practice of Shikantaza, the practice of Zazen meditation. On the one hand, there's these two aspects of the practice of mindfulness. On the one hand, it's this clear alertness. There's a goal. When the mind starts to fall into distraction, when it's kind of falling into sloth and torpor, as you say, kind of sleepy, it's not paying attention. You need to invest some energy into it. And on the other hand, when the mind wanders away here and wanders off there, you need this lasso of remembering to bring the mind back. So there's always these two aspects that go to make up mindfulness. And then the monkey, I think probably most of us have a pretty good familiarity with this monkey mind that you're dealing with if you're sitting on a cushion. It's just running off here, running off there. It never seems to find any peace. And so as the elephant climbs up this path, the elephant of the mind climbs up this path. Eventually, the monk has tamed, and he's riding at peace on this path. It's another kind of explication of the Oxfordian pictures, and the flames of the passions of all of the distractions of life, the eight worldly winds, everything have died down, and he reaches the top, and then at the top he turns around and he comes back down. So why do he turns around and he comes back down? He comes back down because until everyone is free, he's not free. Until everyone is liberated, he's not liberated. So having had this realization himself, he needs to share it in some way with everyone to make it real. So Shakyamuni Buddha is trying to explain this path to Ajatasattu in a way that makes sense to him. And he had asked him, he said, just even a carpenter or a hairdresser, there's a certain joy in what they do. There's a certain skill or craft, and there's a a feeling of satisfaction and joy in performing this craft well. And there's certain joys of life that come along with it, maybe some family life, maybe whatever it might be. And if it's just sitting simply on, outside your house at the end of the day and watching the sunset, you say, what is there in practice that equates to that? And so the Buddha takes this up and he keeps coming back using these metaphors of the craftsman, using the same metaphors that Ajatasattu asked him, to express to him that the fruit of practice isn't something that's realized at the end of the day. The fruit of practice, it is the practice right here and now. And he kind of goes through this elephant path. So he says, first is the joy, he said, of simply taking up the path. Just simply taking up the path, the joy of a simple life. Just the joy of finding a simple life, a way of living that's invested in a way that is itself easeful and has a modicum of joy and happiness to it. The path of being grateful for what you have, it arises naturally in that. And that the curious thing is that the more we let go of this pursuit of happiness, trying to, I need all this stuff to, if I just have a little more of this and have a little more of this, finally, I'm going to get to some place where I'm really happy and it's all going to be fine. And no. Buddha, quite frankly, notwithstanding this 80-year-old Shakyamuni wandering up and down the Ganges, I think a Buddha is probably a pretty lazy guy. Pretty lazy guy. There's not a lot to do. And you realize this is all the truth, just exactly as it is. It just has to be seen. What's he going to do? Go around and start painting the lilies, with gold paint or something? Like, it's just, he's seeing into the truth of this. And so living this very simple, taking up this life, taking up this Buddha way right from inception. So to practice this simple life, not being driven by what are sometimes called the 8 worldly winds, which are what drives most people on in life. Right and wrong, good and bad, fame and shame, winning and losing. The Affirming Faith Mind Sutra that we chant sometimes, there's a line that says, this heavy burden weighs you down. Why keep judging good and bad? Let go of gaining and losing, gaining and loss, winning and losing. If you let go of all of that, how much is enough? How much is enough then? Tolstoy has this lovely story I told before, where he, at the end of the day, there's this very peasant who starts out pretty satisfactory, but then his wife puts a bug in his ear that really they need to have a little better standard of life. And he becomes quite greedy. And from being a peaceful, kind of happy guy, he starts to fight with his neighbors. And then he hears about this paradisical realm somewhere in Kazakhstan or somewhere, who knows where it was. And they've given away land for free, as much land as you can walk around in a day. And he goes there and he walks himself to death. Just when he comes back to the place where he starts, which is going to measure the ambit of how much of this land he acquires, he dies. He just dies. And Tolstoy says, how much of this land does a man need in the end? About 6 feet. About 6 feet. So how much do you really need to be happy? We make ourselves sick, chasing after more, better. So first is this joy of a simple life. Being like the monk that, in the time of the Buddha, he was ratted out to the Buddha by one of his brother monks, because he was sort of bemoaning his lot in life, happiness, and the guy thought he was crying for the loss of his happiness, of having once been a prince and all of his lovely women and all of his wealth and all of the tasty delights he had to eat. And when he went to the Buddha, he says, no, he said, this is the first taste of real, genuine happiness I've had in my life. Just putting all of that down and just appreciating this moment, whatever it may be for what it is. So the first is the joy of a simple life. And the Buddha talks about that. He says, anybody, he said, a monk, he doesn't have to pay taxes. He doesn't have to work. He does his practice. He's just, so while he's dependent, you could say he's a wandering mendicant, he's just dependent on the handouts of others. At the end of the day, he's without all of these extra torments that are involved in maintaining the superstructure of, a wealthy life or whatever it may be. Not worried about people taking stuff away from them, losing. Oh my God, I'm going to lose it all. He doesn't have anything to lose. And then the second is the joy of an ethical life. The simple joy of practicing an ethical life. And what's the joy? Practicing the precepts. Sometimes people talk about them being golden chains, but they're not golden chains to bind us. They're the path of ease and joy. It's a path of ease and joy because you're letting go. It's not a bunch of rules of right and wrong. They're like marker boys. They're like lights on the side of a road or on a runway, so that you don't fall into the brambles on either side. So it's simply a matter of identifying for us where this path of harmony is, and it requires discipline. It requires discipline because some of the precepts are more weighty, not to kill. Well, I understand that, not to kill. Well, how? When you eat an apple, you're taking life. You can't live without taking life. Okay, well, that's great. Then I'm just going to chow down on a 16-ounce T-bone. Well, there is. Everybody has to figure that one out for themselves. But there is kind of a difference there, isn't there? You say, well, it's just life. But there's a story about those where there was a monk. It's in the Tibetan lineage, I think. But there's this monk who's he's beset upon by a demon, and there's all these demons that are set. Have you ever encountered them on the path? I've never seen any in the Zen, but you never know. But this demon forces him into making a decision, and he says, you have to violate. To continue on the path, you have to violate one of your precepts, either the precept against killing, or the precept against abusing sexuality, not being respectful in your relationships, or the precept against not intoxicating the mind with drink. And so he thinks about this and he says, surely the least of these precepts, surely the way that causes the least harm would just be to take some alcohol and get drunk. What's the harm in that? Some teachers, Trungpa used to give his students alcohol. Zen teachers, I've heard also, it's sometimes called truth soup alcohol. And it was some people are so uptight that they're just so anxious, they've never known ease. And like I can understand that, but it's a dangerous path to set somebody on. But anyway, so this monk, he says, no, I'll take the alcohol. And sure enough, you see where this is going. He takes the alcohol and he gets drunk. And then he sees the comely neighbor widow woman who's over there. He goes over and pretty soon they have a lovely amorous encounter. And she's kind of hungry, so he goes over and kills a goat and brings it back to roast for her. So you never know. So it's a path of discipline. And what do you get? What's the peace and joy that comes from that? So it's a simple thing. It's this path of discipline. It's not change. It's not living with a tormented mind. It's simply not living with a tormented mind, of living as a liar. The path of being a liar. You go through, and well, there's somebody in our family, lovely person, but she says, well, just lie. It's easier. Lots of times it's just plain old easier. And sometimes, a white lie can, if it's not about your own advantage. But living as a liar or a cheat, living as an angry person, where you're just angry all the time, living like a hornet. I'm always amazed by hornets. I love most living beings, but I don't understand hornets. They're naturally angry. I don't know if they come alive angry or what it is, but they just kind of seem to look for a fight with wherever they find themselves. But this life of living as harmlessly as possible, which is what the precepts are, living as harmlessly as possible, living as harmoniously as possible, honestly, with integrity, generous, calm, peaceful, kind, sympathetic, upright, and noble. So it strikes me that the practice of the precepts are as being upright and noble. And what do you get? You get the joy that comes from behaving in an upright, noble way. And then the Buddha goes on and talks about the joy of practicing with the five, what we call the five hindrances or the five pickles. These five hindrances are, sensual desire, anger, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt, small doubt. So there's a joy in letting go of those states of mind. Practicing with them is again a struggle. You require these two implements of the monk in practicing with these hindrances of working with the elephant mind, this wild elephant. But as they're tamed, there's a joy in having a mind that becomes still. A mind that is still, a mind that is, the Buddhists described it as malleable and inclined to imperturbability. So somebody says something, somebody says something rude, you don't fly off the handle. You don't have to get your own back. You don't have to defend yourself. It's a mind that is without complaint. Oh, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong. It's a mind that can invest itself with energy. It's a mind that's at ease. So what's the joy? Not being driven and tormented by these hindrances, these kleshas. The Tibetans talk about kleshas, these states of mind that precede the karmic action, these negative emotions, reactivity of one form or another, either in terms of craving or anger, dissatisfaction, pushing away. So being at ease, confident, not caught by past or future. Relaxed, absorbed in this present moment, whatever it might be, without being stuck anywhere, without either craving something to be different or craving something or wanting to push something away or judging this is wrong, no, this is wrong, these people are wrong the way it is, should be like this, they don't know anything there, or no, that's not fair, he's got all that stuff, I want some of this stuff. So the Theravada Sutras liken this process of purification and discipline and dealing with intense mental states. He said it's like a blacksmith working with hot iron. So a blacksmith working with hot iron, he starts with this red hot ball of iron. And the koan mu, the commentary of the koan mu, Yatsutani talks about working with mu. It's just like swallowing a red hot iron ball. And those of you who've taken up some of these koans, you feel a little bit like that. With this red hot iron ball, you can't vomit it out, you can't swallow it down, it's there and it's burning. That's what kind of our normal state of mind is a lot of the time, right? It's just burned, it's dissatisfying. The Buddha in the Fire Sutra, he described it, he said, it's a mind on fire. It's like your head's on fire all the time. It's on fire with desire, it's on fire with aversion, it's just on fire, So the blacksmith heats the iron until it glows red, and then he plunges it. If you ever worked with iron, you heat it, you work it, you pound it out, and then you plunge it in water. And you can harden it, you can make it more malleable, but you discipline. You do this over and over and over again, like the Japanese katana swords. They sometimes they pound these things out and back on themselves, like 200 folds in the thing. until the steel becomes what starts out as something that's rough, and it becomes workable. It becomes disciplined. The mind becomes disciplined. You overcome these fires of greed, anger, and delusion. You render the mind malleable, so that it's not being caught. It's not on fire. It's not on fire with lust and aversion. It's not on fire with burning emotions and passions. So we plunge this red hot iron ball into the cooling water of practice. It's a lovely metaphor. Cooling down, tempering, calming the mind through spiritual practice. And so then the Buddha talks about, next he talks about practice of samadhi. So samadhi's, there's so many different definitions of samadhi, and so when you, depending on what you're reading, there's the samadhi of this and the samadhi of that, and there's a heroic path samadhi, and there's a precious mirror samadhi, and there's the great mirror samadhi, and but generally, when we talk about samadhi, it's an absorption of the mind, where you take up the practice of meditation, and there becomes this absorption, the engaging of the mind in it. Some people never get it. In all honesty, not very many, but there are a few people I've known who profess to be unable to meditate. And I'm not sure that that's true, but there are, but to actually, when you remember when you first started meditating, you'd sit there and this is just ridiculous. This is making it worse, not better. And the Tibetans call it the waterfall phenomenon, where you actually sit down and all of a sudden your mind is just like this torrent of thoughts and emotions and aversion and all of these different voices. And you think, well, this is just making it worse. But for most people, for most of us, it's all of a sudden becoming aware of what your normal state of mind actually is. What's actually happening. And what an incredible joy when that becomes still. And I still remember the first time, I easily remember the first time my mind became completely still. I was just sitting there. I didn't know that was possible. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing. It's kind of ludicrous, but embarrassing. When I was so driven in my practice of law, when I started practicing Zen, it was 2 years. Like first, it was realizing that I had a train of thought running in my mind that was always there when I was awake. I was always practicing my thoughts. It was always, if I was driving, if I was talking to somebody, my mind would be split, but I could have billed. Lawyers are always looking for billable hours. I could have billed for, 18 hours a day, legitimately, it was just always there. And then when that all of a sudden dropped away, and being able to pick that up, as the Buddha says, wieldy, being able to pick it up and put it down to actually apply it when it needs to be applied. Wieldy, malleable, steady, attained to imperturbability. So when we talk about samadhi, it's this, the way I talk about it, it is when it usually starts with concentration. Some people find it very simple. And for one friend, he says, wait, just stop thinking. Just stop thinking. It's all there is to it. Well, good for most of us that it was that easy. But it's when the mind, which is attending, so I often say, Dido used to say, close up the gap. Close up the gap. And so there's this gap in the train, in the stream of awareness, gap, we flitter off here and there. But the more difficult gap is there's me meditating, I'm applying myself to whatever it is. I'm meditating on the flame of the candle. I'm here, the flame of the candle is there. I'm here listening to the sounds out there. I'm up here paying attention to my breath down there. So when those two things become one, it's what we usually talk about as samadhi. Sometimes it's shamatha. And when the mind of samadhi is really access concentration. The mind, in fact, it's access concentration. The mind of samadhi is the mind of prajna wisdom that we talk about, chanted in the Heart Sutra. This wisdom beyond wisdom, this wisdom of not knowing. It's the wisdom of samadhi. It is the function of samadhi. It's sometimes described as being like a lamp and its light. I'll talk more about that maybe next week or something, but it's not like two different things. Oh, there's a lamp and then there's a light. It's the lamp and the light are one. The lamp and the light are one. So where you have samadhi, you have wisdom. Prajna wisdom is naturally present as a function of samadhi. So, and some lineages, in the Theravadan tradition, that some of the Tibetan traditions, you talk about samadhi or shamatha and vipassana. So vipassana is insight meditation. So once the mind becomes completely still, it's possible for this introspection to arrive, to this kind of excoriating, is that word, of the self, this sense of separation, to actually look at it, and until it kind of gets ground away, it kind of gets rusted away just by the process of not being able to hold up its own substantiality. It just gets kind of dissolved. It's like a clear mirror reflecting the truth of whatever appears in front of it. So the Buddha describes the he picks up this metaphor of the craftsman that Ajatasattu asked it in the beginning of it, and he's talking about he talks about the joy and happiness that arises in meditation, the joy of samadhi. So Hakuin says, how vast is it? His song of samadhi, how vast is this song of joy of samadhi? It's like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Joy, 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 joy. How vast is the heaven of boundless samadhi? How bright and transparent the moonlight of wisdom. What is there outside us? What is there we lack? Nirvana is openly shown to arise. This earth where we stand, pure lotus land, this very body, the body of Buddha. So he talks about the mind of samadhi. He says it's like a skilled potter working with, he calls it well-prepared clay. Well-prepared clay. And how, so the clay is like this mind, this mind of stillness, how it can, by attention to it, it resolves itself in some favorable way. Remember years ago, I don't know if I've never been part of, but Hogan talking about clay, about how apparently when you're a potter, if you're a good potter, one of the things you do is you look to the future. So you make clay and then you bury it in the ground somewhere. You actually bury it and you leave it for 10 years or whatever. So it takes on these qualities. It becomes more prepared. Or a goldsmith, working with well-prepared gold when the mind is refined and workable and free from impurity. So in the Buddha's, when he's talking to Ajatasattu, he talks about the jhanas. And the jhanas are these 4 stages of concentration that are identified on the Theravada path. And it said even when the Buddha died, in some of the passages, he everybody thought he was dead. He kind of went down through the jhanas, descended down through these meditative states to complete samadhi, and then he came back up again and he said, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And then he went back down and dissolved. But the first of the jhanas, so he's talking about the benefit that comes, the happiness and joy that comes from meditation itself. And the first of the jhanas is this practice of a mind that becomes, the flames are somewhat extinguished, shall we say, and it's the mind that is detached from this craving after, in the Dharma Sutra it says, give rise to a mind that dwells nowhere. That isn't attached to, as soon as you attach to something, I've got to have it this way. I really like that. That's mine. Don't take your hands off that. That's, as soon as we're attached, we're caught. We're stuck. We're caught. The Velcro is caught somewhere. So this detachment from the external world, and it says the rapture that's born from seclusion of the senses, serenity in its seclusion. So sometimes people think this serenity and seclusion is this state of mind of having to remove yourself away from other people to a place of isolation. So, and you know, quite frankly, there's a party line. There's a lot to be said. There's an awful lot. You know, sadhus for thousands of years have removed themselves to the ideal place for an Indian sadhu, at least the ones I've talked to, is a valley in the mountains on each side with two streams that come down in, and they'll set up shop there, and they really like being by a stream, and but they seclude themselves. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they go to Varanasi and just smoke a lot of hashish. But you know, in terms of a lot of the time, that's what these guys are looking for, and it's uh, characterized by applied and sustained thought. So it's not. It's like when you're actually applying the teachings. So you apply, you know, what you've read about Zen. You apply what you've read about what you've heard about how to practice, about how to settle the mind, about how to bring the mind back, how to whatever it is. So there is this active teaching, education of the mind. You're pulling it back, doing all of these things with it. And the Buddha has this lovely. He describes it as being characterized by rapture and bliss. Rapture and bliss. And what does it arise from? It arises from not only the experience itself, but the experience of confidence in the path. When you actually get it and you realize, no, I'm practicing now. No, I get this. I'm not there. There's here and there's here, but I'm engaged in practice, and there is a peace and a joy in that. And the metaphor he used for that, he talks about a bath attendant who needs bath soap. You know, I guess you couldn't just buy a can of it. You know, you had to kind of get this soap up until you made a ball that was perfect. It wasn't leaking water. It wasn't hard. And then using this bath soap, having created this perfect ball that was to be able to use it, and it talks about kneading in the joy and pleasure that permeates the entire body. Mind is unified, body is energized but not contained. And the second jhana is when thought falls away. So that is, and it's interesting, in this day and age, people say, oh, that doesn't happen. I don't know how many times I read this where people say, oh, the mind doesn't stop thinking. That's just crazy. That's not true. The mind becomes completely still. The mind becomes completely still, and you feel thought arising like it's a bubble that arises in it. So that's what he's talking about, the second jhana. And the mind becomes unified in inner confidence and joy. Reasoning and investigation fall away. In the metaphor for it, he says it's like a lake, like a cool, vast lake, the lake of the mind. It's fed from this deep underground spring, and that's the source of everything that comes into it. Rather than being kneaded in from the outside, this stillness is inherent in this lake. It's being fed by this spring. And then the third jhana, the rapture and joy, fall away. So, oh, I don't want the rapture and joy to fall away. The rapture and joy fall away in complete equanimity. Complete equanimity. Into this, sometimes described as a refined happiness, but it's the metaphor that's used is like lotuses that are growing in a pond, and they're completely immersed in it. And we talk about, lotuses can't exist in a clear water. Lotuses only exist in muddy water. No mud, no lotus, as the old saying goes. And that's what the practice is. Arising, like, so embedded in this world, in this dusty, muddy world, to arise out of this, to become a lotus that is, roots are set firmly in the world that rises out of it. And then finally, the fourth jhana is pure equanimity, free from both ease and pain. It's like a person covered from head to foot in clean white cloth, bright, constant mindfulness, free from pain or pleasure, mental state of complete stillness. So these images show happiness isn't something that comes from without. Happiness is inherent in the nature of the mind, realize. Now it's interesting, this last metaphor, there's a sutra, it's called the Washerman Sutra, I think. And it talks about somebody who is pretty clearly realized, but he was still practicing. That other monks would, they'd say, why do you keep doing this? And he said, well, it's like washing clothes. And this is back in the day when you took the clothes down to the Ganges and you beat them on the rocks and you wouldn't rise them. They said, you beat them and you wash them and you wash them and you wash them and you wash them until finally they're clean. And then you take them out and you dry them in the sun. But he said, what you're left with is you're left with the stink of the soap. You're left with this lye stink of the soap. And he says it takes a long period of time. You have to leave them out in the sun so that they lose that stink. So in the Zen, we talk about the stink of enlightenment that comes from, where people, when they realize they start laugh outrageously at odd moments. Is anybody looking and kind of, it's talk eloquently about, whatever is going on. And the practice is over time, it just becomes more and more simple, more and more plain, more and more authentic. I also have to say, I always feel a little bit guilty talking about the jhanas because they aren't a map for my own meditation experience. So it's in terms of, it's not like when I'm meditating, I recognize these different states. It's more, like you're starting off with this very jagged state of mind like this, very, very jagged like this. And then over time, by the application of sustained effort, it becomes more of a sine wave and then it becomes a sine wave, and then it becomes very, very steady. And then it drops away altogether. Once it drops away altogether, that is what is often described as the push. That's the push. That's seeing the smoke of the fire. It's access concentration. True happiness is found not in what we get, not in anything outside. It's an old Zen saying that whatever comes in the front door is not the family treasure. Whatever it is that comes in the front door is not the family treasure. What's that talking about? What are you talking about? Whatever comes in the front door. That's what this workshop is about. Realizing this true and happiness lies within. Truly realize this yourself. The Buddha, at one point he says, better to win 1,000 battles. It's in the Dharma. Better to win 1,000 battles. Better than to have 1,000 successes. Better than to be the best. Better than to be loved by everybody. He said, is to win one battle. And that battle is over. That's where we are. So thank you very much.